My father sent one email. For sentences. No apology, no explanation, just stay away from the wedding or you'll embarrass us. I read it twice, then booked my flight. Not to crash my sister's day. Not to make a scene. I flew to Hawaii because my 83-year-old grandmother called me from a borrowed phone at midnight, crying, telling me she didn't know where her money was going. $340,000. And I had the recordings to prove who took it. My name is Serena Calloway. I am 31 years old. I work as an adult protective services investigator out of Atlanta, Georgia, and I make $54,000 a year doing a job that most people in my family consider embarrassing. I've heard it described as glorified babysitting, as charity work for people who made bad decisions, as something you do when you couldn't figure out how to do something better. That last one came from my father. He said it at Christmas dinner in 2021 with a room full of relatives watching and a glass of Bordeaux in his hand, and when he finished saying it, he laughed. Not cruelly, not loudly. Just that short, private laugh that told you he meant every word and didn't expect you to do anything about it. I didn't do anything about it. I smiled, pushed my food around my plate, and told myself it didn't matter. I had been telling myself that for about 26 years by then. It was the thing I was best at. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how this family actually worked, because none of what happened later makes any sense without understanding the foundation first. My parents are Gerald and Pamela Calloway. Gerald is 69 years old, retired cardiothoracic surgeon, a man who spent 30 years cutting open human chests, and considers that sufficient evidence that his judgment in all other areas of life is beyond question. Pamela is 62, former private school headmistress, a woman who perfected the art of appearing warm while doing cold things. They live in a 5-bedroom house in Buckhead, Atlanta. They drive European cars. They belong to a country club. They have opinions about wine and architecture and what constitutes an appropriate career for a Calloway woman. My sister Danielle is 3 years younger than me. She is the thing my parents built their identity around. She is beautiful in the way that makes strangers feel better about themselves just for being near her. She is charming without effort. She has 400,000 Instagram followers, a lifestyle brand called Luxe and Light, and a fiancé named Carter who comes for money and doesn't mind showing it. Danielle never questioned our parents, never challenged the rules, never left a room feeling like the wrong piece in a right-shaped puzzle. That was my job. I was born asking questions they didn't want to answer. I was born noticing things they preferred stayed unnoticed. When I was 12 years old and our father came home 3 hours late for my school recital, I said something. When I was 16 and my mother told a relative that Danielle was the pretty one with a smile that made clear the sentence had a second half she was choosing not to say, I heard it. When I was 22 and I told my father I was going to study social work, he didn't yell. He did something worse. He looked at me for a long moment with an expression that said, well, I suppose some people are built for that, and went back to reading his newspaper. I moved to Atlanta after graduation. I built a quiet life, an apartment in Decatur, a cat named Ruthie, a job that exhausted me and broke my heart regularly and mattered in ways I couldn't always explain. I dated. I didn't date. I called home on the required holidays and attended the required dinners and performed the required version of myself that kept the peace without actually solving anything. And through all of it, the one constant, the one person in that family who made me feel like I wasn't assembled wrong was my grandmother, Eleanor Calloway, 83 years old, my grandfather's widow for 11 years. Sharp as a tack on her good days, soft and funny and honest in ways that people half her age can't manage. She called me Rena. She was the only one who did. She called me Rena, and she meant it the way you mean someone's name when you actually see them. When I was 8 and I cried because my father forgot to pick me up from soccer practice, Eleanor sat me down at her kitchen table and said, your daddy loves you, but he's got a hole in him where his listening should be. That's not your fault, and it's not something you can fix. What you can do is learn to love people who know how to love you back. I didn't fully understand that until I was about 25, but I never forgot she said it. Eleanor lived in a modest assisted living facility in Savannah called Whispering Pines for 6 years. She had a small suite, a garden view, a book club on Thursdays. Her friends were there. Her routine was there. The staff knew her name and her preferences and which nurse made her laugh. It wasn't fancy, but it was hers, and she was happy. In February of 2023, my father announced that he was moving her. The reason he gave was beautiful. He said the facility in Savannah wasn't providing the level of specialized memory care that Eleanor needed as her mild cognitive impairment progressed. He said he had found an exceptional place in Scottsdale, Arizona. Warm climate, state-of-the-art facilities, a dedicated staff trained in progressive dementia care. He said Eleanor had agreed. He said she was excited. I called Eleanor that same week. She was quiet on the phone in a way that didn't sound like excitement. She said, "Your father has it all arranged." I asked her if she wanted to go. There was a pause long enough to fill a room. Then she said, "I just want to stop being a burden, Rena." And something in my chest went still and cold, because that was not a sentence Eleanor Calloway said. Eleanor Calloway said, "I've lived 80 years and I've earned the right to my opinion." She didn't say she wanted to stop being a burden. That sentence belonged to someone who had been told, repeatedly and in various ways, that they were one. She was moved to the Copper Ridge Premier Living Facility in Scottsdale, Arizona on March 4th, 2023. 2,000 miles from Savannah, 2,000 miles from her book club, and her garden view and the nurse who made her laugh. My father said she'd love it. My mother said it was the responsible thing. Danielle posted a photo of Eleanor at the new facility on her Instagram with the caption, "So grateful Grandma is somewhere she can truly thrive," and collected 11,000 likes. I tried to call Eleanor at the facility 4 times in the first week. Every time, I was told she was resting, or in therapy, or having a difficult adjustment day and wasn't taking calls. On the 5th call, the front desk coordinator said, with the kind of practiced pleasantness that can only be learned, that the family had requested Eleanor's calls be screened for her emotional well-being during the transition period. The family had requested. I was family. I hadn't requested anything, which meant there was only one other person that sentence could refer to. I sat with that for 3 days. I told myself there was an explanation. I told myself my father, whatever his flaws, would not deliberately cut Eleanor off from me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I saw patterns in things because my job trained me to look for them, and that sometimes a family just makes a difficult decision about elderly care, and it's hard, but it's not sinister. I almost believed it. Then, on March 29th, 2023, at 12:18 in the morning, my phone rang. Unknown number. Arizona area code. I answered on the second ring, and I heard Eleanor's voice, whispering, urgent, terrified in a way I had never heard from her in 31 years of knowing her. "Rena, I only have a few minutes. There's a night aide here who's been kind to me. She's letting me use her personal phone. If anyone finds out, she could lose her job. So I need you to listen carefully. And I need you to not call me back on this number, because I don't know when I'll be able to reach you again." I sat up in bed. My heart was in my throat. "Grandma, I'm listening. Tell me everything." And she did. She told me that my father visited every 3rd week, always on a Tuesday, always between 2 and 4 in the afternoon. She told me he always brought papers. She told me he would sit beside her bed and put a pen in her hand and say, "Sign here, Mom. It's just for your care. It's just a formality. You don't need to read the whole thing. You know I handle all of this." She told me she signed because she was tired and because he was her son and because when she asked questions, he would use a voice, quiet and steady and immovable, that made her feel like the question itself was a symptom of her confusion rather than a reasonable thing to want answered. She told me she'd seen a bank statement left on her nightstand by accident 3 weeks earlier. "Rena," she said, "I had over $580,000 in savings. From the house your grandfather and I sold in 2015. From his life insurance. From 40 years of careful living. It was supposed to be for you girls. For both of you. An inheritance. Something real. She stopped. I could hear her breathing. Careful, measured. The statement showed a balance of 212,000. Gone in 11 months. Withdrawn in amounts between $20,000 and $40,000 at a time. My hands were shaking. I had a pen. I was writing on the back of a grocery receipt I found on my nightstand. I wrote every number she gave me. Every date she remembered. Every detail. The facility doesn't charge for most of what he says it's for, she told me. I asked one of the nurses about the specialized therapy he mentions. She looked at me like she didn't know what I was talking about. Grandma, I said carefully because I needed to be sure, because I needed her to say it clearly. Do you think your father is taking money from your accounts without your real consent? There was a silence, long enough that I thought she'd gone. Then she said, I think my son is stealing from me. And I'm scared, Rena, because I don't know what happens when there's nothing left. I didn't sleep that night. I opened my laptop at 12:45 in the morning and started a new document. I typed at the top, case file, victim, Eleanor Calloway, age 83, suspected perpetrator, Gerald Calloway, and I got to work. Here is what most people don't understand about financial elder abuse. It doesn't look like robbery. It doesn't come through a broken window or a stolen wallet. It comes through a pen. It comes through a signature on a form the victim didn't fully read, didn't fully understand, and didn't feel safe enough to refuse. It comes through a son who sits beside his mother's bed with a reasonable voice and a reasonable explanation, and a document that quietly transfers a lifetime of savings into accounts she will never see again. It is the most invisible crime in America, and it is the most common. I had worked 41 cases like this in my 3 years at APS. I had seen it done by strangers, by caregivers, by neighbors. I had never once imagined I would open a case file with my own father's name at the top. But here I was, 12:45 in the morning, kitchen table, laptop open, grocery receipt covered in handwritten notes. And I was not a grieving granddaughter right now. I was an investigator, because if I let myself be a grieving granddaughter, I would fall apart. And Eleanor didn't have time for me to fall apart. The first thing I needed was documentation. Not assumptions, not suspicions, not the testimony of an 83-year-old woman that a skilled defense attorney could dismiss as the confusion of a dementia patient. I needed paper. I needed records. I needed a trail so clean and so clear that not one person in a courtroom could look at it and say, well, maybe there's another explanation. I started with what I had. Eleanor had told me the withdrawals were large, regular, and labeled as care expenses the facility didn't actually charge for. That alone was a pattern. In financial exploitation cases, perpetrators almost always disguise transfers as legitimate expenses. Medical care, facility upgrades, specialized therapy. They choose labels that sound reasonable, that a victim with cognitive decline won't question, that an outside observer won't immediately challenge. My father was a surgeon. He understood medical language. He knew exactly which words to use. Over the next 3 weeks, I built a profile. I pulled every public record I could access without a subpoena. Arizona's Secretary of State business filings, property records in Buckhead, my father's professional license history, clean, of course, 30 years, not a single complaint, the kind of record that makes juries like you before you've said a word. I pulled Danielle's business registration, Lux and Light LLC, filed in Georgia, October 2022. Initial capital listed as private family investment. No specific source named. October 2022. For months before Eleanor was moved to Scottsdale. I wrote that down and underlined it twice. Then I did something that cost me 3 nights of sleep to decide. I called Eleanor's facility directly, not as a granddaughter. I used my APS credentials and identified myself as a caseworker conducting a routine wellness inquiry on behalf of a family member. It wasn't technically a lie. I was a caseworker. Eleanor was a family member. The inquiry was about her wellness. I asked the billing coordinator a simple question. What is your facility charge for specialized cognitive therapy sessions? She put me on hold for 90 seconds. When she came back, she said all therapeutic programming at Copper Ridge is included in the base residency rate. We don't bill separately for any cognitive or occupational therapy services. Medicare and private insurance cover supplements as needed. There are no additional charges for any of our standard care programs. I thanked her and hung up. Then I sat very still for about 4 minutes. Because Eleanor had told me that my father cited specialized therapy as the reason for withdrawals totaling, by her recollection, somewhere in the range of $340,000. And the facility that was supposedly providing that therapy didn't charge for it separately. Not $1. Not ever. The money was going somewhere. And it wasn't to Copper Ridge Premier Living. On April 14th, 2023, Eleanor called again. Same unknown number, same whispered urgency, same careful breathing of a woman who knew she was running out of time on a borrowed phone. Rena, she said, something happened. Gerald came on Tuesday like always, but this time he brought your mother. And Danielle. I sat up straighter. Danielle was there. She was there. Eleanor's voice was thin, tight. They were celebrating something. I could tell. Danielle had that look she gets. You know, the one where she's trying not to smile too wide because she doesn't want you to ask what she's smiling about. And your father kept patting her shoulder. Like she'd done something good. Like something had just been confirmed. What did they say, Grandma? Did they tell you what they were celebrating? Not exactly. Eleanor paused. But Gerald left some papers on the counter when he went to use the restroom. Just for a moment. I'm not as slow as he thinks I am, Rena. I read what I could. It was a transfer authorization. Dated that day. $40,000. The destination account had a name on it. She stopped. What name? Lux and Light LLC. I didn't say anything for a moment. I was writing. Hand moving fast, letters uneven. Grandma, are you certain that's what it said? I'm 83, not blind. I read it twice. Lux and Light LLC. That's Danielle's company. That's her Instagram business. Gerald transferred $40,000 from my savings account into your sister's company account. And then he came back from the restroom and picked up the papers and put them in his briefcase and smiled at me and said, all taken care of, Mom. You're in such good hands. The silence between us was heavy. Rena, she said softly, does Danielle know where the money is coming from? I closed my eyes. That was the question I had been circling for weeks and didn't want to land on. Because there were 2 possible answers and neither one was good. Either Danielle knew and was complicit, or Danielle didn't know and was benefiting from theft without understanding it, which made her partially a victim and mostly still guilty of not asking questions she should have asked. Neither version of my sister was someone I wanted to defend. I don't know yet, Grandma, I said, but I'm going to find out. She was quiet. Then, Rena, I need to tell you something else. Something I've been sitting with for a while and haven't said out loud because I wasn't sure if I was being paranoid. You're not paranoid. I said it before she finished. Tell me. There's a man who visits sometimes, she said. Not Gerald. Someone younger. 40s maybe. He comes with a briefcase. Gerald introduced him once as a financial advisor. He sits with Gerald and they talk in the corner of my room like I'm not there. Or like I can hear them but can't understand what they're saying. She took a breath. Last month I heard the younger man say, once the real property transfers, the liquid assets are secondary. We consolidate everything by year end and the estate is clean. And Gerald said, she won't be a problem. She's cooperative. She won't be a problem. She's cooperative. I wrote those 2 sentences down and stared at them for a long time. Grandma, do you know this man's name? I think Gerald called him Warren. She paused. He had a card. He left it on the table once, and I kept it. I hid it inside my Bible. She paused again. I'll try to read it to you. I heard rustling, pages turning, then her voice, careful and deliberate, reading each word like it mattered. Warren T. Alcott, Estate and Wealth Management, Alcott Financial Group, LLC, Atlanta, Georgia. I typed the name before she finished the sentence. Grandma. That is exactly the kind of detail that is going to matter. You did exactly right keeping that card. She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. Your grandfather always said the Bible was the best hiding place in the world because people assume it's only good for the obvious things. I smiled despite everything. How are you sleeping? I asked. Are you eating? I'm managing, she said quietly. The nights are hard. I lie there and I think about your grandfather and I think about what he would say if he could see what Gerald is doing, and I think Thomas would be so ashamed. He loved that boy. He worked himself into the ground so Gerald could go to medical school. And this is what it came to. Her voice broke on that last sentence. Just slightly. Just enough. I wanted to tell her it would be okay. I wanted to give her the comfort of a guaranteed outcome. But I had worked enough cases to know that promising outcomes you can't control is a kindness that eventually becomes its own kind of cruelty. So instead I said, Grandma, I want you to listen to me. You are not imagining this. What is happening to you is real, and it is wrong, and I am going to stop it. I don't know exactly how yet, but I need you to trust me, and I need you to stay safe, and I need you to keep talking to me every chance you get. I will, she said. I will, Rena. She hung up at 1:09 in the morning. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 a.m. building a timeline. I had names now. I had amounts. I had a financial advisor's business card number. I had a pattern that was starting to look less like opportunistic theft and more like a structured, premeditated plan to drain an elderly woman's estate before anyone outside the family noticed. The next morning I called my supervisor at APS, Patricia Owens, 22 years in the field, a woman who had seen things that would make most people quit the profession and chose instead to get angrier and sharper every year. I asked her a hypothetical, not about my family, not by name, just a hypothetical about jurisdictional protocol when a Georgia-based investigator has reason to believe financial exploitation is occurring in Arizona against an elderly victim who is a Georgia resident. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You're not asking about a hypothetical case, are you? No, ma'am, I said. I'm not. She told me to come to her office. I went. I closed the door. And for the first time, I said my father's name out loud in a professional context. I said, I believe my father is systematically looting my grandmother's savings with the assistance of a financial advisor, potentially with the knowledge of my mother and my sister, and I believe the amounts already transferred are in excess of $300,000. Patricia didn't react the way people react when they hear something shocking. She just reached for a legal pad and said, Start from the beginning. That conversation lasted 2 hours. At the end of it, she pulled out a business card and slid it across the desk. Special Agent Donna Reeves, FBI Atlanta Field Office, Financial Crimes Division. Patricia said, This has moved past APS jurisdiction. The interstate element, Georgia to Arizona, the involvement of a licensed financial advisor, the scale. This is federal. I looked at the card. I thought about Eleanor lying in her room in Scottsdale, hiding a business card inside her Bible, listening to men talk about her estate like she was already gone. I picked up the card. I made the call that same afternoon. Special Agent Reeves answered on the third ring. Professional, crisp, unhurried. I identified myself, gave my APS credentials, and said I had documentation and recorded testimony related to a suspected elder financial exploitation case with interstate elements and a minimum identified loss of $340,000. She said, Tell me what you have. So I did. And this time I used every name. Gerald Calloway, Pamela Calloway, Danielle Calloway, Warren T. Alcott, Lux and Light LLC, Alcott Financial Group LLC, Copper Ridge Premier Living, Scottsdale, Arizona. Every name, every amount, every date. When I finished, Agent Reeves was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then she said, Ms. Calloway, I'm going to need you to come in. And I'm going to need you to bring everything. I had 61 pages of notes by then. Printed bank records Eleanor had described in detail. Facility billing confirmations. Business registration documents. A timeline spanning 14 months. I said, I'll be there tomorrow morning. That night I sat on my kitchen floor with Ruthie in my lap, and I let myself feel it for exactly 20 minutes. The grief of it. The specific, gutting grief of loving a family and slowly, carefully, irrefutably proving that the people who should have been safe were the ones you needed protecting from. 20 minutes. Then I got up, washed my face, and started preparing for the FBI meeting. Because Eleanor was still in that room. Still signing papers she didn't understand. Still being told she was cooperative. And I was not done. If you are watching this right now, wherever you are, whatever time it is where you live, I want you to think about something. Have you ever been in a room with your family and felt not just unloved, but actively erased? Not yelled at, not argued with, just quietly, consistently treated like you were not quite real enough to matter? Drop a comment and tell me, because what I'm about to describe is what happens when that erasure becomes a business decision. When the family that taught you to make yourself small decides that small is exactly what they need you to stay. The FBI field office in Atlanta sits on a nondescript stretch of highway that looks nothing like what you'd imagine if you've only ever seen federal buildings in movies. No marble columns, no imposing steps, just a low, gray building with a parking lot and a security desk and a woman behind it who took my ID without expression and told me Special Agent Reeves would be with me shortly. I sat in a waiting room chair with my bag on my lap and my 61 pages of notes inside it, and I thought about Eleanor. I thought about her voice on the phone at midnight, that terrible, careful whisper. I thought about what she said about my grandfather. Thomas would be so ashamed. I thought about a man who worked himself into the ground so his son could go to medical school. And I thought about what that son had done with the life that sacrifice built. Agent Donna Reeves was 44 years old, dark hair pulled back, wearing a suit jacket the color of slate. She shook my hand once, firm and brief, and led me into a conference room with a long table and a whiteboard and two other agents she introduced as Marcus Webb and Claire Fontaine from the Financial Crimes Unit. They had notepads. They had coffee. They did not have expressions that told me anything. I sat down. I put my notes on the table, and I started talking. I talked for 90 minutes without stopping, except when one of them asked a question, which happened exactly 7 times. They asked about the nature of Eleanor's cognitive diagnosis. Mild cognitive impairment with intermittent lucid periods, I said. Not full dementia. She has capacity on her good days, which matters enormously because if she had been fully incapacitated, the legal framework would be different. She wasn't. She was a woman with good days and bad days who was being deliberately targeted on the bad ones. They asked about the power of attorney. Eleanor signed a durable power of attorney authorizing my father to manage her finances on March 4th, 2023. The same day she was moved to the Scottsdale facility. I said that twice. Same day. Because in my experience, same-day signatures on documents that transfer significant legal authority are not coincidences. They are windows. You move someone when they are disoriented, exhausted, emotionally destabilized by the transition, and then you put a pen in their hand while the dust is still settling. Agent Webb looked up from his notepad. Was she represented by independent counsel at the signing? No, I said. My father's personal attorney was present. No independent representation for Eleanor. He wrote something down. They asked about Warren Alcott. I gave them the card details Eleanor had read to me over the phone. Alcott Financial Group LLC, Atlanta, Georgia. Agent Fontaine typed the name into her laptop, and her expression didn't change, but something shifted slightly in the angle of her shoulders. I noticed it the way you notice things when you've spent years reading rooms for a living. Do you know this name? I asked. She looked at me. We may have seen it before in another context, she said. That's all I can tell you right now. That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the meeting, like a splinter working its way deeper. They asked about the recordings. I had 8 of them, all made with Eleanor's verbal consent, clearly stated at the beginning of each call. She had said, on recording, "I know you're recording this, Rena, and I want you to. I want there to be a record." Each recording was between 6 and 22 minutes long. Each one documented specific details of withdrawal amounts, visit dates, documents presented, statements made. I had transferred them to a flash drive the night before, and I slid it across the table to Agent Reeves. She picked it up and held it for a moment without speaking. Then she said, "Ms. Calloway, I want to be direct with you about something." I said, "Please. What you've brought us today is significant. The documentation, the recordings, the pattern you've identified, this is not a marginal case. But I also need you to understand that a federal investigation of this nature, involving a licensed financial professional, interstate transfers, and a family member with medical credentials and community standing, this will be a process. It will not be fast. And in the interim, your grandmother is still at that facility, still potentially being accessed for additional transfers. So before we talk about what comes next legally, I need to ask you one question." I waited. "Is your grandmother safe right now? Not financially. Physically. Is she being cared for? Is she being harmed in any way beyond the financial exploitation?" I thought about Eleanor's voice. I thought about her saying the nights are hard. I thought about her hiding a business card in a Bible. I thought about a woman who used to tell me I was worth fighting for now lying in a room in Scottsdale, wondering if anyone was coming. "I believe she's physically safe," I said. The facility staff appeared genuinely caring. The harm is financial and psychological. The isolation, the control over her communications, the systematic dismantling of her sense of her own reality. That is its own category of harm. But she is not being physically hurt. Agent Reeves nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "Here's what we're going to do." She laid it out in the clean, sequential way that people who do serious work talk about serious things. The FBI would open a preliminary inquiry into Gerald Calloway, Warren T. Alcott, and Alcott Financial Group, LLC. They would subpoena banking records from the accounts Eleanor had described. They would contact Adult Protective Services in Arizona to coordinate a parallel welfare investigation. And they would want me to continue documenting Eleanor's calls, using proper consent protocols each time, as long as I could do so without putting her at additional risk. There was one more thing. Agent Fontaine looked at me across the table. "Ms. Calloway, is there any upcoming event, any scheduled family gathering, any reason your father might need to move quickly on additional transfers or property changes in the near future?" I opened my mouth, closed it, because something had just landed in my memory that I had set aside 3 weeks earlier as irrelevant. My aunt, my father's sister Patricia, had sent a group text to the family in late March. "Just a heads up, your cousin Bree is getting married in June. Destination wedding in Sedona. The whole family is invited, and it would mean so much to have Grandma Eleanor there if she's well enough. Your father has already arranged for her transport. The whole family is invited." My father had already arranged transport. I looked at Agent Fontaine, and I said, "There's a family wedding in Sedona in June. My father is bringing my grandmother. And I think you need to hear something about what happens at family gatherings when my father has papers that need signing." The room got very quiet, because what I was about to say was the thing that changed the shape of everything. It was the thing that shifted this from a financial investigation into something with a deadline and a ticking clock and a specific window that would either be the end of the case or the end of Eleanor's estate. I said, "My grandmother told me in our last call that my father mentioned completing the final transfer before the end of the year. She said he used the phrase before everything is properly allocated. She said he referenced real property. The house she and my grandfather owned in Savannah, which they sold in 2015, was already liquidated. But Eleanor still has one remaining property asset, a piece of land in coastal Georgia that my grandfather bought in 1987. 11 acres, currently valued at approximately $720,000. It is still in Eleanor's name. And if my father presents a quitclaim deed at a family gathering, in a moment of celebration, when Eleanor is emotionally overwhelmed and surrounded by people she loves and trusts, when she is tired and happy and off her guard, she will sign it. She will sign it because she signed everything else, because he has spent 2 years teaching her that signing is what cooperative looks like. Agent Reeves set down her pen. She said, "When is the wedding?" "June 14th, I said. 8 weeks from now." She looked at Webb, then at Fontaine, then back at me. She said, "We're going to need to move faster than I initially indicated." I drove home from that meeting in a kind of controlled numbness that I recognized from the worst days of my casework. The state your brain goes into when the information is too large to process all at once, so it just keeps you moving, keeps you functional, delays the full weight of it until you're somewhere safe enough to feel it. I made it to my apartment. I fed Ruthie. I sat on the kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet and I let the weight of it come. My father was not just stealing money. He was executing a plan. A structured, deliberate, multi-year plan involving a financial advisor with what sounded like a prior history of similar activity, a power of attorney obtained under duress, a pattern of controlled isolation and document coercion, and an endgame that involved transferring nearly $1.3 million in total assets out of an 83-year-old woman's name before she was gone. And when she was gone, there would be no trail left to follow. The estate would be clean, just like Warren Alcott had said. Clean. And Danielle. I kept coming back to Danielle. I had looked at her Instagram that afternoon on my phone in the FBI parking lot, still sitting in my car before I could make myself drive. Lux and Light. A new post. Photographs of product packaging for a skincare line she was launching. Rose gold lettering, cream-colored boxes, the aesthetics of a woman who believed she had earned something. The caption said, "Years of work coming to life. So grateful for every person who believed in this vision." And then a row of pink heart emojis. Years of work. I thought about $40,000 transferred from Eleanor's savings account into Lux and Light LLC on the same day. My father visited the facility with a smile and said, "All taken care of, Mom." I thought about whether Danielle knew those boxes were paid for with money that belonged to our grandmother. And I thought about whether it mattered legally whether she knew. Because here is what I had learned in 3 years of working financial exploitation cases. Ignorance, genuine or performed, is not a firewall. If you receive funds that were obtained through fraud, the question is not only whether you knew. The question is also whether you should have known. Whether a reasonable person in your position with your access to information would have asked questions. Whether the absence of questions was itself a choice. Danielle had received, by my calculation, somewhere between $80,000 and $120,000 in transfers to Lux and Light LLC over the course of 14 months. She had launched a skincare line, rented a studio space in Midtown Atlanta, hired 2 part-time employees, and purchased equipment. She had posted about her gratitude for family support. She had not, as far as I could determine, ever asked where specifically that support was originating. Was that ignorance? Was it willful blindness? Was it complicity? I didn't know yet, and the not knowing was its own kind of pain. In the 3rd week of April, Eleanor called again. The voice that came through the borrowed phone was different this time. Quieter, slower. The kind of quiet that isn't peace. It's exhaustion that has gone on long enough to start looking like peace from the outside. "Rena," she said. "I'm here, Grandma. I had a bad day today." She said it simply without drama. I forgot where I was for a little while. I thought I was in Savannah. I thought I could hear Thomas in the next room. And then I remembered, and it was very hard to remember. I closed my eyes. "I'm so sorry. The nights are worse," she said. "Because in the day there are people, there is movement, there is noise to hold on to. But at night it's just me and my thoughts, and I keep thinking, what if I sign something I shouldn't and I'm not even aware enough to stop myself? What if there's a bad day and Gerald comes and I'm not sharp enough and I sign something, and by the time I'm clear again, it's already done. That fear was not irrational. It was precise. It was the fear of a woman who understood exactly what was being done to her and was terrified of the moment her own mind became the instrument of her undoing. "Grandma," I said, and I chose the next words very carefully because I did not want to give her false certainty, but I also could not let her carry that fear alone. "I need you to listen to me. I have people helping me now. Serious people with authority. And we are working as fast as we can to make sure that no more transfers happen and to get you somewhere safe. I cannot tell you exactly when, but I need you to know it is happening." She was quiet. Then she said, "Rena, when this is over, and you'll have to forgive me for being an old woman who needs to say this out loud. When this is over, can I come to you? Can I come to Atlanta? I don't need much. I just need somewhere that feels like somebody chose me." I put my hand over my mouth. Then I moved it and said, "Grandma, I already have a room picked out." She made a sound. Not quite a laugh. Not quite a sob. Something in between that was the most human sound I had heard in months. "I'll come to Atlanta," she said softly. That sounds like somewhere I could breathe. She hung up at 12:51 in the morning. I sat in the dark for a long time. Then I opened my laptop and started researching assisted living facilities in the Atlanta metro area. Just in case. Because hope is not the same as naivety. And preparing for the outcome you're working toward is not arrogance. It is the thing that keeps you moving when everything else is trying to make you stop. I had 8 weeks until the wedding in Sedona. 8 weeks to build something solid enough to stand up in federal court. Strong enough to stop a surgeon with 30 years of community standing and a financial advisor who had apparently done this before. 8 weeks to get my grandmother out of a room in Scottsdale before the last piece of her estate disappeared into a document she signed on a bad day while the man who was supposed to love her watched and said nothing except, "Good, Mom. You're doing great. Just a few more pages." 8 weeks. I closed the laptop at 2 in the morning. Set my alarm for 5:30. Because there was work to do, and I was the only one doing it. I want to pause right here and ask you something before we go any further, because I know some of you watching this right now have a family member who is elderly, a grandmother, a grandfather, a parent, an aunt or uncle who is aging and vulnerable and surrounded by people who are supposed to be their protection. And I want you to ask yourself right now, honestly, when did you last speak to that person directly? Not through another family member, not through a text chain, not through secondhand updates from someone who controls the narrative. When did you last hear their actual voice, unfiltered, with no one else in the room? Because the silence between that answer and right now is exactly the window that people like my father use. That silence is not negligence on your part. It is opportunity on theirs. Keep that in your mind as I tell you what happened next. By the first week of May, the FBI inquiry had quietly expanded. Agent Reeves called me on a Tuesday afternoon while I was in my car outside a grocery store, and her voice had a different quality than it had in the conference room. Still controlled, still professional, but underneath it, something that in another person I might have called urgency. "Ms. Calloway," she said, "we've completed our initial review of the banking records associated with the accounts your grandmother described. I can't share specific numbers yet because the investigation is ongoing, but I can tell you that what we found is consistent with your documentation. And I can tell you that Warren Alcott is known to our financial crimes unit. He has appeared peripherally in 2 prior investigations, neither of which resulted in prosecution. This would be the third." I sat in my car in that parking lot with the engine running and the grocery bags on the passenger seat, and I processed that sentence one word at a time. Known to our financial crimes unit. Appeared peripherally in 2 prior investigations, neither of which resulted in prosecution. So Warren Alcott had done this before. Or something close enough to this that the FBI recognized the shape of it. And he had walked away twice. And my father had found him, or been found by him, and together they had constructed a scheme that was almost elegant in how it used the infrastructure of legitimate financial management to disguise what was actually a coordinated stripping of an old woman's life savings. This was not impulse. This was not a family member making bad decisions under financial pressure. This was professional. Warren Alcott brought professional architecture to what my father provided in terms of access, authority, and the cover story of devoted son managing his aging mother's affairs. I said, "What does this mean for the timeline?" "It means we're moving the Sedona situation to the top of our priority list," she said. "We don't want that wedding to happen with your grandmother present and your father in possession of unsigned property documents." "Neither do I said. "Here is what I need from you," she said. "I need at least one more recorded call with your grandmother before June 14th. I need her to confirm on record that she has not authorized any transfer of the coastal Georgia property and that she does not intend to. That recording becomes part of our evidentiary foundation for an emergency injunction on any property transfer attempts." "I can do that," I said. "There's one more thing." Her voice shifted slightly. "We've been looking at Danielle Calloway's business entity, Lux & Light LLC. I was very still. "The transfers to that account are significant enough that we need to determine whether she is a knowing participant or an unknowing beneficiary. We're going to need to speak with her." "How are you going to approach that?" "Carefully," she said. "We would like to do it before the wedding, if possible. Before your father has any indication that we're looking at the full picture. If she is unknowing and we approach her correctly, she may become a cooperative witness. If she is knowing, we want that conversation to happen before she has a chance to coordinate her story with your father. And if she warns him, then we move to arrest faster than planned and hope the property transfer hasn't already happened." She paused. "This is why the timing matters so much, Ms. Calloway. Every piece of this has to land in the right sequence." I understood sequencing. I understood it from casework, from investigations, from the particular kind of chess game that financial exploitation cases become when the perpetrator is intelligent and resourceful and has a community reputation to hide behind. What I was less prepared for was how it felt to apply that understanding to my own sister. To sit in a grocery store parking lot and calculate the optimal moment for a federal agent to ambush Danielle in a way that minimized her ability to run to our father before the net was closed. I drove home. I did not go back into the grocery store. I left the bags in the car and I sat on my couch for a while just breathing. On May 9th, Eleanor called. It was earlier than usual, 7:43 in the evening, and the voice that came through was sharper than the last call, clearer. One of her good windows. I could always tell within the first 10 seconds. There was a quality to her speech on the good days, a precision, a density of detail that was simply different from the slower, more diffuse quality of the harder ones. "Rena," she said. "I'm here, Grandma. How are you?" "Better today," she said. "I've been writing things down. Like you told me." I had asked her in our second call to keep a small notebook hidden the same place she kept the business card inside her Bible and to write down every visit date, every document presented, every statement made. Simple notes, dates and words. She had been doing it for 6 weeks. She read me 11 entries, 11 visits she had documented, 11 occasions on which my father had arrived between 2 and 4 in the afternoon on a Tuesday and presented papers for signature. The entries were brief but devastatingly specific. April 1st, Gerald and Warren both here. 2 documents. Gerald said sign here and here and here, just moving money around, Mom. Nothing to worry about. April 22nd, Gerald alone. 1 document. He said it was for the facility upgrade fund. He seemed in a hurry. He kept checking his phone. When she finished reading, I said, "Grandma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think carefully before you answer." She said, "I'm listening. Your coastal property, the land in Georgia that you and Grandpa bought in 1987. Has Gerald ever mentioned it to you? Has he presented any documents related to that property?" Silence. Long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then she said, once, "About 3 weeks ago. He mentioned it. He said it was complicated to manage from a distance and that it might be time to simplify the estate. He said he would bring paperwork next time. Something called a deed transfer or a quitclaim. I'm not sure exactly. He said it was just a formality. Just a formality. Has he brought it yet? No, she said. Not yet. Grandma, I need you to listen to me very carefully. If Gerald brings any document related to that property, I need you to not sign it. I need you to say you are tired. You need to rest. You will look at it next time. Can you do that? She was quiet again. Then, what if he gets upset? Let him get upset, I said. That is not your problem to manage. Your only job is to not sign that document. She exhaled. All right, Rena. I won't sign it. And then she said something that I have thought about almost every day since. She said, you know what the hardest part of all of this is? It's not the money. I was never attached to the money the way your father thinks I am. Your grandfather and I lived on very little for most of our lives, and we were happy. The hardest part is what it tells me about who Gerald became. I raised that boy. I held him when he was sick. I drove him to every practice, every exam, every interview. I believed in him before he believed in himself. And now I am sitting in a room in Arizona and I am hiding a notebook inside a Bible, and I am learning how to say no to papers that my own son is asking me to sign. She stopped. I just want to know where I went wrong with him. What I missed. Grandma, I said, you didn't miss anything. Some people make choices that have nothing to do with how they were raised. Gerald made his choices. That is not a reflection of you. She made a sound. Then she said, your grandfather used to say that you can pour clean water into a cracked vessel all your life, and it will never hold. He said some people are just cracked that way, and the only mercy is to stop pouring before you're empty yourself. I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said he was right. I know, she said. I just took 83 years to believe him. She said goodnight and hung up at 8:12 in the evening. I transcribed that call immediately. Every word. Then I sent the audio file to Agent Reeves with a message that said, she confirmed the property has been discussed, but not yet transferred. She will not sign. We have a window. Reeves responded within the hour. Good. Keep it open. 3 days later, on May 12th, the thing happened that I did not see coming. The thing that made everything worse before it got better. The thing that, if I am being fully honest, broke something in me that I am still in the process of putting back together. My mother called me. Not a text. Not an email. A call. From a number I hadn't blocked because it was her work cell. A number I didn't recognize until I heard her voice. Serena. I almost hung up. The only reason I didn't was because my name in her mouth sounded different than it usually did. Usually when my mother said my name, it had a quality of mild inconvenience to it. The sound of something she had to acknowledge before she could move on to what actually mattered. This time it sounded like she was holding it carefully, like she wasn't sure it would survive the trip from her mouth to my ears. Serena, I need to talk to you. I said nothing. She said, I know you've been calling the facility. I know you've spoken to Mother. And I know that you're upset about the financial arrangements. Gerald explained everything to me, and I want you to understand. Here is what I want to tell you about that sentence. I want you to understand. It is the sentence that people use when they have decided that the problem is your comprehension rather than their behavior. It is the sentence that removes the speaker from accountability by placing the burden on the listener. You don't understand. If only you understood. Let me help you understand. I had heard that sentence, or versions of it, for 31 years. I said, Mom, I understand everything. That's the problem. She was quiet. Then, Gerald is taking care of her, Serena. She requires a level of care that none of us can provide individually. The financial arrangements are for her benefit. Warren is a credentialed professional. Everything is being handled properly. I asked, has Eleanor told you that she understands what she's signing? Well, she has dementia, Serena. She can't always be expected to. She does not have dementia, Mom. She has mild cognitive impairment. There is a significant legal and medical difference. And on her good days, she is more clear-headed than most people half her age. My mother said nothing. I said, Did Gerald tell you how much has been withdrawn from her accounts? He manages her finances. That's what the power of attorney is for. $340,000, Mom, in 14 months, into accounts that are not hers, into Danielle's business. Silence. Long silence. The kind that tells you the person on the other end is doing math they didn't realize they needed to do. Then she said, Gerald said those were family investment transfers. Eleanor agreed to support Danielle's business. I said, Eleanor told me on a recorded call that she did not agree to any transfers to Danielle's account and that she does not know where her money went. Would you like me to play you the recording? More silence. Then my mother's voice changed. Not dramatically, not a collapse, just a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in register, like a note played slightly flat. She said, Serena, is this going to become a legal matter? I thought about Agent Reeves, about the FBI file with my grandmother's name at the top, about bank subpoenas and prior investigations, and a financial advisor who had walked away twice before. I said, Mom, it already is. She hung up. I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time, because what I had just heard in my mother's voice was not anger. It was not denial, not the way denial usually sounds. It was something closer to the sound of a person who has just realized they are standing in a building that was condemned a long time ago, and nobody told them. Or nobody told them in a way they were willing to hear. Had my mother known? Had she known the scale of it? Had she signed off on it? Had she turned carefully away from every question she could have asked and decided that asking was not a price she was willing to pay for the life she had? I didn't know, and not knowing was its own particular cruelty. I called Agent Reeves the next morning and told her about my mother's call. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she said, That's a significant development. Your mother making contact suggests she knows something is moving. Whether Gerald told her to call or she acted independently matters less than the fact that she called at all. What does it mean for the investigation? It means we need to accelerate the Danielle conversation. If your mother talks to your father tonight and he talks to Danielle and Danielle starts moving money or deleting records, we lose significant evidentiary ground. We're going to reach out to Danielle this week. This week? This week, she said. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Danielle's Instagram post. Years of work coming to life. The rose gold lettering. The pink heart emojis. The absolute, radiant confidence of a woman who believed she had built something. I said, it doesn't matter if I'm prepared. Do what you need to do. Agent Reeves and Agent Webb made contact with Danielle on May 15th. I was not present. I was not supposed to know the details of that conversation immediately. What I know is what Agent Reeves told me in a call later that evening. She said, your sister was not aware that the transfers to her business came from your grandmother's personal savings accounts. She believed the money was from a family investment fund your father had described as a shared family asset. She believed your grandmother had consented and was involved in the decision. She was shown the bank records. She was shown the timeline. She was shown the withdrawal amounts alongside the transfer dates to her account. And, I said, Agent Reeves paused. She said your sister sat very still for a long time. Then she asked to call an attorney. My chest tightened. Is she going to cooperate? She's scared, Agent Reeves said carefully. But she's not protecting him. At least not yet. Her attorney will advise her on cooperation. But her initial reaction was not the reaction of someone who knew. It was the reaction of someone who just realized they had been used. I sat with that. The image of Danielle sitting very still in a room with 2 federal agents and a set of bank records that told her that everything she thought she had built was constructed on something stolen from the woman who was supposed to inherit it alongside her. Did she ask about Eleanor? I said. Did she ask if she was okay? A pause. Yes, Agent Reeves said. That was the first thing she asked. I closed my eyes. I don't know what that changes, I said. Maybe nothing, Agent Reeves said. Maybe everything. We'll see which one it is when it matters. There were 29 days left until the Sedona wedding. 29 days until my father would have Eleanor in the same place as a notary and a document transferring $720,000 in real property out of her name and into his control. 29 days until the last piece of the estate would be gone. I sat at my kitchen table that night with all 61 pages of my notes spread out in front of me and Ruthie walking across them like she owned every piece of paper in that room. I thought about my mother's voice, the way it had shifted. I thought about Danielle sitting still in a room with federal agents. I thought about Warren Alcott and 2 prior investigations that never resulted in prosecution. I thought about my father, 69 years old, retired surgeon, Bordeaux in his hand, that short private laugh. And then I thought about Eleanor. I'll come to Atlanta. That sounds like somewhere I could breathe. 29 days. I picked up my pen, turned to a fresh page, and started planning the part that would determine whether any of it mattered at all. There is a particular kind of morning that exists only when you are about to do something that cannot be undone. The air feels different, not heavier exactly, but denser, like it has more information in it than air usually carries. Everything you look at seems to be holding still in a way that ordinary things don't hold still. Your coffee cup, the light on the wall, the face in the bathroom mirror, all of it just slightly more present than it was yesterday, more aware of itself. I woke up on June 13th, 2024, the day before my cousin Bree's wedding in Sedona, to exactly that kind of morning. And I lay in bed for 11 minutes before I got up because I knew that the moment my feet hit the floor, everything that came next was already in motion, and there was no version of that morning where I could choose to stay still. I had not been invited to the wedding. My father's email on that subject had come on May 3rd, 17 days before Agent Reeves spoke to Danielle, when he still believed the world was arranged the way he had arranged it. It was 4 sentences. The wedding is a family celebration. Given your distance from this family, both physically and emotionally, we think it's best you sit this one out. Bree understands. This isn't personal. It was signed Gerald. No love. No comma before the name. Just Gerald, flat and final as a door closing. I had read it twice, and then I had replied with 3 words. I'll be there. He had not responded. I booked my flight to Phoenix on May 4th, rental car reserved. Hotel in Sedona, 12 minutes from the Chapel of the Holy Cross, where the ceremony was scheduled for 4 in the afternoon on June 14th. 1 carry-on bag. No checked luggage. I needed to be able to move fast. Agent Reeves had her own travel arrangements. She and Agent Webb would be in Sedona by June 13th. Agent Fontaine was coordinating with Arizona APS and local law enforcement. The emergency injunction blocking any property transfer involving Eleanor's coastal Georgia land had been filed in federal court on June 10th and granted on June 12th at 11:47 in the morning. I had screenshot that court document and looked at it more times than I could count because it was the first official, legal, federal confirmation that what I had been building for 14 months was real and recognized and standing on solid ground. The injunction meant my father could not legally complete the property transfer, even if Eleanor signed. But it did not mean he wouldn't try. It did not mean he wouldn't put the pen in her hand at a family dinner table and say just a formality, "Mom, just sign here," because he would not know about the injunction until we told him. And the moment we told him was going to be a moment that required planning. I landed in Phoenix at 2:15 in the afternoon on June 13th. Rented a white Nissan Sentra. Drove 94 miles northeast to Sedona. The landscape was extraordinary in the way that landscapes are when you are too wound up to fully receive them, but your body registers them anyway. Red rock formations, enormous and ancient, rising out of the desert floor with a kind of absolute authority that made everything human seem very small and very temporary. I thought about Eleanor saying that sounds like somewhere I could breathe. And I thought about how she had spent the last 15 months in a room in Scottsdale looking at a parking lot. And I thought about how much I wanted to show her something with this much sky in it. I checked into the hotel at 4:30. Room 211. Small. Clean. A window facing the rocks. I sat on the bed and called Agent Reeves. She picked up immediately. You're here? I'm here, I said. Good. Webb and I are at the rental property on the north end of town. We've confirmed your grandmother arrived at the resort with your father and mother this afternoon. She's in the family block, room 318. Your father is in 320 adjoining rooms. Adjoining rooms. Of course. Did she look okay? I said. When you confirmed she arrived. Reeves paused. She was in a wheelchair, which wasn't in any of the facility records we reviewed. That's new. My stomach tightened. Since when? Since approximately 3 weeks ago, according to the facility logs, she said. The staff notes indicate increased fatigue and reduced mobility. Nothing medically alarming, but it's a change. He knows she's more fatigued, I said. He timed the wedding for when she's at her most depleted. That's a reasonable interpretation, Reeves said carefully. When are you moving? Tomorrow morning. Before the ceremony. We want to speak with your father and Warren Alcott, who arrived this evening and is also staying at the resort, before anyone is dressed for a wedding. Before the celebratory atmosphere has a chance to blur the lines of what's actually happening. And Eleanor? Arizona APS will accompany you to her room at 9 in the morning. Your presence as her family member and as an APS investigator gives us clean legal standing for a welfare check. The injunction is filed. The subpoenas have been served. Your father has no legal ground left. But we want you to see her before anything else happens. We want her to hear your voice before she hears anything else. I pressed my hand flat against the hotel bedspread. Okay, I said. One more thing, Reeves said. Your sister called her attorney this morning and confirmed her cooperation. She has provided a sworn statement detailing everything your father told her about the source of the funds. She is not a target of the investigation, but her statement is significant corroborating evidence. I said nothing for a moment. Reeves said, she also asked me to tell you something. Personally. What? She said to tell you she's sorry, and that she should have asked more questions. I sat with that. The weight of it. The specific particular weight of an apology that comes 14 months too late and is still somehow exactly what you needed to hear. I said, tell her I know. I didn't sleep much. I lay in the dark and listened to the desert quiet, which is a different kind of quiet than city quiet. Deeper, more complete, like the world genuinely pausing to think. At some point after midnight, I got up and stood at the window and looked at the rock formation silhouetted against a sky full of more stars than I had seen in years. I thought about my grandfather Thomas buying 11 acres of coastal Georgia land in 1987. I thought about what he thought he was building. A foundation. Something that would last. Something that would hold the people he loved after he was gone. I thought about what it meant that the thing built to protect Eleanor had nearly become the instrument of her ruin. At 8:45 in the morning on June 14th, I was standing in the corridor of the third floor of the Sedona Resort in jeans and a plain blue shirt with my APS badge on a lanyard and an Arizona APS investigator named Sandra Cho beside me. Sandra was 51 years old, 23 years in elder welfare, and she had the particular energy of someone who had seen enough injustice to be permanently, quietly furious about it, but had learned to use that fury as fuel rather than noise. She knocked on the door of room 318 twice, firm and clear. A long pause. Then, slowly, the door opened, and there was Eleanor. She was in the wheelchair. She was wearing a pale green cardigan over a floral blouse. Her hair was white and neatly pinned, and her hands were in her lap, and she looked smaller than she had in any version of her I had held in my memory. She looked like someone who had been very carefully, very systematically reduced. And then she saw me. Her face did something I don't have adequate words for. It wasn't just recognition. It was the expression of someone who had been holding their breath for 15 months and had just, finally, been told they could stop. Rena, she said. I crossed the room and kneeled in front of her wheelchair, and I took both her hands in mine and I said, I'm here, Grandma. I'm right here. She held my hands very tightly. She didn't cry. Eleanor Calloway was not a woman who cried easily, and she was not going to start now. She just held my hands and said, I knew you'd come. I told myself every single day that you'd come. Sandra Cho stood at the door, professional, still giving us our moment. Then she said, Mrs. Calloway, my name is Sandra Cho. I'm from Arizona Adult Protective Services. I'm here because your granddaughter contacted us on your behalf, and we'd like to speak with you privately if that's all right. Eleanor looked at Sandra, then back at me. Then she said, Is Gerald going to know about this? Yes, I said, but not until you've had a chance to say everything you need to say first. She nodded once, sharp and decisive, the way she used to nod when she had made up her mind about something. The Eleanor nod, the one that meant I've assessed the situation and I've decided and we are done discussing alternatives. Okay, she said, let's do this properly then. We spent 40 minutes in that room. Sandra conducted the welfare assessment. I sat beside Eleanor and held her hand. Eleanor spoke clearly, precisely, with the full force of one of her best windows. She confirmed the withdrawal history. She confirmed the property discussions. She confirmed the pattern of documents and signatures and the voice her son used when he wanted compliance. She confirmed that she had not consented knowingly to the transfer of any of her assets beyond the original power of attorney signing on March 4th, 2023, which she stated she had signed under duress and without independent legal counsel. Then she said something that was not part of Sandra's official assessment questions. She said it looking directly at the recording device on the table between them. She said, I want the record to show that I am 83 years old and I am speaking to you on one of my clearest days and I am in full possession of my understanding of this situation. My son, Gerald Calloway, has taken money from me that was not his to take. He did it systematically over a long period of time, using my trust in him as the mechanism. I did not fully understand what I was signing. I was told each time that the documents were routine. They were not routine. And I wanted on record that if I had understood, I would not have signed a single one. She paused. I also wanted on record that my granddaughter Serena drove 900 miles and spent 14 months building the case that is putting this right. And whatever happens next, I want people to know that she did not do it for the money. She did it because she is the person in this family who understood that doing the right thing is not optional. It is the only thing. Sandra looked at me. I was looking at the floor. Eleanor squeezed my hand. Look up, she said quietly. You don't apologize for doing the right thing. I looked up. At 9:57 in the morning, 2 floors below us, Agent Reeves and Agent Webb knocked on the door of room 412 where Warren T. Alcott was staying. At 10:03, they knocked on the door of room 320 where my father and mother were getting ready for a wedding. I know what happened in those rooms, not from being there, but from what Agent Reeves told me afterward and from the court documents that became public record in the months that followed. I'll tell you what I know. Warren Alcott opened his door in a bathrobe, saw 2 federal agents holding credentials, and said nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Then he said, I'd like to call my attorney. Agent Reeves said, That's your right. Please do that now. He was taken in for questioning. His phone and laptop were seized pursuant to a warrant that had been granted the previous afternoon. He did not make a statement that day. His attorney arrived at 11:15 and advised him to remain silent. He has remained silent since, which in the context of the broader investigation is its own kind of statement. My father's door was different. According to Agent Reeves, Gerald Calloway opened the door fully dressed. Dark suit, already prepared for the ceremony. He looked at the 2 agents in the corridor, and his face did not immediately register alarm. It registered something closer to irritation, the expression of a man who considers himself to be someone whose time should not be wasted. He said, Can I help you? Agent Reeves identified herself and said she needed to speak with him regarding his management of Eleanor Calloway's financial accounts. My father said, All of that is handled through proper legal channels. I have a power of attorney and a financial advisor. There's nothing to discuss. Reeves said, Sir, we're going to need to discuss it regardless. My mother was visible in the background. Agent Webb noted in his report that she did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for a knock on a door for a long time and had simply not known which door it would come from. My father was taken to the resort's business center for questioning. He asked for his attorney at the outset, and his attorney, reached by phone, told him to say nothing. He said nothing. He sat across from two federal agents for 90 minutes and said nothing because the evidence was so complete, so layered, so meticulously documented over 14 months by his own daughter using skills he had once described as glorified babysitting, that there was nothing left to say that would help him. The power of attorney was suspended by court order at 11:41 that morning. All remaining accounts linked to Eleanor's estate were frozen pending the full investigation. The coastal Georgia property, $720,000 of land that my grandfather bought in 1987 as a foundation for the people he loved, was secured in Eleanor's name. Bree's wedding happened at 4 in the afternoon. I was not there. I was sitting in a garden at the resort with Eleanor in her wheelchair beside me, and 2 cups of tea from the lobby cafe on the table between us. We watched the light change on the red rock formations, and we didn't talk very much, because sometimes the thing that needed to be said had already been said, and what was left was just the being there. At some point, Eleanor said, "Your grandfather would have loved this view." I said, "I think he'd have liked Sedona." She said, "He'd have liked you. He always did. But I think this version of you, the one who showed up and did the work and didn't need anybody's permission, he'd have liked her especially." I didn't answer. I just looked at the rocks. After a while, she said, "What happens now?" "Legally?" I told her. The investigation would continue for months. There would be civil proceedings to recover the transferred funds. Warren Alcott was facing federal charges. My father's situation would depend on how much of the criminal case the FBI and the DA decided to pursue. But civil liability was essentially certain. Danielle's company would likely need to repay the funds transferred to it, which would effectively mean the end of Lux and Light in its current form. She listened to all of it without expression. Then she said, "And me? What about me? Where do I go?" "Atlanta," I said. "When you're ready. I have a room." She looked at me for a long moment. "The room you picked out," she said. "Does it have a window?" "South-facing," I said. "Morning light from about 7 until noon." She nodded slowly. The Eleanor nod. Decisive. Final. Done discussing alternatives. "That'll do," she said. "I want to tell you what came after, because this story doesn't end in Sedona. It continues, and it continues in ways that are both harder and better than I expected, often at the same time. The federal investigation resulted in Gerald Calloway being formally charged in September 2024 with elder financial abuse, wire fraud, and conspiracy. Warren T. Alcott was charged on 6 counts including securities fraud, conspiracy, and elder financial exploitation. The third time federal prosecutors had enough to bring charges. The first time they were certain they would stick. The prior 2 investigations, I learned later, had fallen apart due to insufficient documentation and witnesses who were either too elderly or too intimidated to testify clearly. Eleanor was neither. She testified via video deposition in November 2024. Sitting in my apartment in Atlanta, morning light coming through the south-facing window of the room I had set up for her, speaking directly into a camera with the full precise force of a woman who had spent 15 months in a room in Scottsdale, deciding that she was not going to let this be the end of her story. The deposition lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Her attorney told me afterward that in 30 years of elder law, he had never seen a deposition so clear, so detailed, or so devastating to the opposing case. My mother was not charged. She cooperated fully with investigators, and her attorney successfully argued that her involvement was limited to passive enablement, that she had signed documents she did not fully investigate and had chosen not to ask questions that she should have asked. She was not exonerated, but she was not prosecuted. She called me in October. I answered. She said, "I'm sorry, Serena." I said, "I know, Mom." We stayed on the phone for a while without saying much. I don't know what we are to each other now. I don't think there's a clean word for it. We are something, and that something is fragile, and I am choosing very carefully how much weight to put on it. Danielle lost looks and light. The business dissolved in August 2024 when the civil recovery proceedings required the return of all transferred funds. She lost the studio, the employees, the skincare line with the rose gold lettering, all of it. She called me in September, 3 weeks after my father was charged. She said, "I keep thinking about what I should have asked." I said, "I know." She said, "I should have asked where the money came from. From the beginning, I should have asked." I said, "Yes, you should have." We stayed on the phone for a long time. We are not where we were. We are not where I want us to eventually be. But we are somewhere. And somewhere is more than we had before. My father pled not guilty. His trial is pending as of the time I'm recording this. I have submitted my documentation, all 61 pages, plus recordings, bank records, facility logs, and Warren Alcott's business card that Eleanor kept hidden in her Bible as evidence for the prosecution. I will testify. I have been told my testimony will be significant. I do not feel triumphant about that. I feel the way you feel when a long, hard thing is almost over and you can see the end of it, but you also know that the ending changes things in ways you can't fully predict, and some of those changes will take years to understand. Eleanor has been in Atlanta since July 2024. She is in the south-facing room with the morning light. She has a book club on Thursdays at the library 4 blocks away. She has friends among my neighbors who I think she likes better than she likes me, which is exactly how it should be. She has good days and harder days because that is what mild cognitive impairment is, a landscape with different kinds of weather, not a straight decline. On the good days, she is sharp and funny and honest, and she calls me Rena the way she always has. On the harder days, I sit with her and we listen to music, and I don't try to correct what she thinks she remembers because some things are more important than accuracy. Last Tuesday, she asked me to sit with her in the kitchen while she made biscuits from a recipe that was her mother's before it was hers. She stood at the counter measuring flour the way she'd done 10,000 times before, and she said, "You know what I've been thinking about?" "What's that?" I said. She said, "Your grandfather used to say that the most dangerous thing in the world was a family that had stopped being honest with each other. He said a family without honesty isn't a family anymore. It's just a group of people sharing a last name and pretending." She looked at me over her shoulder. "He was right, wasn't he?" "Yeah, Grandma," I said. "He was right." She turned back to the biscuits. "Well," she said, "at least we know the truth now. All of us. The whole ugly shape of it." She pressed the dough with her hands, steady and practiced. "That's something, at least. The truth being out. It's something. It's everything," I said. She made a sound. Half agreement. Half the specific dismissal of a woman who has learned the hard way that everything is a large word and should be used carefully. "It's a start," she said. "Let's call it a start." The biscuits were perfect. My name is Serena Calloway. I am 31 years old. I make $54,000 a year doing a job that my father once described as glorified babysitting. I used every skill that job gave me to build a case over 14 months that resulted in federal charges against my father and his financial co-conspirator, the recovery of my grandmother's estate, and the return of an 83-year-old woman to a life where she goes to book club on Thursdays and makes biscuits from a recipe that is older than anyone who has ever wronged her. I am not the family failure. I never was. I was the one who paid attention. And sometimes, if you pay attention long enough and carefully enough and refuse to stop even when every voice in the room is telling you that you're the problem, sometimes you become the one thing that cannot be accounted for in somebody else's plan. The one thing they forgot to control. The one thing that brings the whole careful structure down. If this story reached you somewhere real, if it touched something you've been carrying quietly and alone, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if there's an Eleanor in your life. Tell me if there's a Serena in you that hasn't been given permission to move yet. Because she deserves to move. And so do you.